The first thing Björk noticed about him was that he wasn't looking at anything. Not the stage, not the crew moving cables in the dark, not the other musicians gathered near the catering table with their drinks and their easy laughter. Kurt Cobain was sitting on a road case at the far end of the backstage corridor, his back against the cinder block wall, his knees pulled loosely together, and he was looking at a fixed point somewhere on the floor that had nothing on it. No phone in his hand, no drink, no cigarette, just a man sitting very still in a room full of noise, absent in a way that wasn't rude, wasn't dramatic, just was. Björk had been watching people her entire life. It was something she did without deciding to do it. She walked into rooms and she read them the way other people read weather, instinctively, constantly, with a kind of animal accuracy that had never failed her. She could tell you within 30 seconds of meeting someone what they needed from the world, what they were afraid of, what sound they would make if they were left alone with a piano in a dark room. She had done this with everyone she had ever met, every musician, every producer, every stranger on a bus in Reykjavik with sad hands. She had never met anyone she could not read, until that corridor, until that road case, until him. It was October of 1992, and the world was in the middle of deciding who both of them were. Björk had spent the better part of the year watching debut take shape in studios in London, a record that felt to her like stepping out of a skin she had been wearing since childhood, the skin of the band, of the collaborative, of the girl from Iceland who made noise with other people. This record was something else, something that lived in the space between electronic music and organic sound, between the body and the atmosphere, between what a voice could do and what people believed a voice could do. The press didn't quite know what to make of it. They were still figuring out the vocabulary. Nirvana, meanwhile, had spent the year inside the strange, violent weather of what Nevermind had created. A record that had not asked permission, had not positioned itself, had simply detonated, and now its creators were living inside the crater. Björk had listened to it the way she listened to everything, carefully and physically, feeling it move through her before she tried to understand it. What she had felt was not something she could easily name. It was not joy. It was not despair. It was something more like recognition. The feeling you get when someone says aloud a thing you had believed was unsayable. They were both in London for separate reasons. A mutual friend, a producer who moved between their worlds with quiet efficiency, had arranged a small gathering at a rehearsal space in Hackney. Not a party, not a meeting, just people, just music. She crossed the corridor and sat down near him, not next to him, near him, close enough that the choice was visible, far enough that it wasn't pressure. He didn't look up immediately. When he did, his eyes were light and tired simultaneously. The eyes of someone who had not slept well in a long time, but had made a kind of peace with that. He looked at her the way people sometimes look at someone they recognize but cannot immediately place. Not celebrity recognition. Something older than that. Something like the recognition of a shared condition. "I know your music," she said. He nodded once, slowly, like the nod cost something. "You know mine?" she asked. A pause, then, "Yeah." That was the entirety of it. Two people who had each dismantled something fundamental about what music was allowed to do, and they sat in a corridor in Hackney and exchanged a total of 4 words. Björk, who was never at a loss, found herself uncertain what to say next. She had expected something, not ego. She had met enough musicians to know that ego often dressed itself as shyness, that the very quiet ones were frequently the most carefully performing their quietness. She had expected beneath the stillness, the familiar architecture, the need to be understood, the need to be seen seeing correctly, the gravitational pull of self that every creative person carried, whether they admitted it or not. She felt none of that from him. What she felt, and this was the thing she would spend years trying to articulate, the thing she would finally say aloud in an interview in 2008, and then regret the inadequacy of the words, was the complete absence of transaction. He was not there to exchange anything. He was not monitoring her reaction to him. He was not, in any detectable way, managing his image in real time the way almost every other person she had ever met was doing, constantly, invisibly, like breathing. He was just there, It was one of the most unsettling things she had ever encountered. Someone had set up instruments in the main rehearsal room. It wasn't planned. These things were never planned in the places where they actually happened. Björk drifted toward the piano. This was automatic for her. She moved toward keyboards the way other people moved toward warmth. She played a few things, fragments, half ideas, the musical equivalent of thinking aloud. Other people in the room picked things up, fell in and out of loosely organized sound. The producer on guitar, a drummer she knew from London sessions, someone whose name she didn't catch on bass. Kurt sat in a chair with his arms folded loosely across his chest and watched. Not critically, not evaluatively. He watched the way you watch a fire, because it's there, because it moves, because something in it is alive. After a while, someone handed him a guitar, an acoustic, scratched, small-bodied, the kind of instrument that looked like it had been loved the way only cheap things get loved, fully without care about preservation. He took it without ceremony, adjusted it in his lap. Let it sit there for a moment. The room didn't go quiet exactly. It shifted. The way a room shifts when something is about to happen that it doesn't yet have a name for. He started playing. No announcement, no adjustment of posture into performance posture. He just began. The way you begin a sentence you've been thinking for a long time, without preamble, because the preamble is already inside you. What came out was not nirvana. It was not anything Björk had heard on the record or in the press or in the mythology that was already constructing itself around him. It was quieter than all of that, and more broken, and more whole. A melody that kept circling back to the same three notes, like a question being asked multiple times in slightly different ways, hoping that one of the times the answer would be different. His voice, and this was the part, his voice came in low and unguarded. Not the voice from the recordings, not the voice that had been compressed and distorted and shaped into a sound that moved through FM radio and shook something loose in millions of people. This was the voice before that, the voice underneath. Björk's hands went still on the piano. She was not aware of this happening. She became aware of it only afterward, when she noticed that her hands were in her lap and that she had no memory of putting them there. The melody went somewhere she did not expect. It didn't resolve. It simply stopped. The way breath stops, the way sleep comes. And then he was quiet. The room held the silence for what felt like a long time. No one said anything immediately. This was unusual in rooms full of musicians who were, as a category, uncomfortable with silence and quick to fill it. But the silence that followed those few minutes of playing was not empty. It had weight. It had the specific gravity of a room that has witnessed something and is not yet sure what to do with having witnessed it. Björk looked at her hands in her lap. She was trying to locate the feeling in her body. Not interpret it, locate it. Where was it? In the chest, yes, but also in the throat. Something in the throat that was not quite an emotion, but was the physical precursor to an emotion, the somatic first draft of something that the mind hadn't finished writing yet. She had written entire albums about exactly this kind of feeling. She had been praised for her ability to translate the body's interior weather into sound. And sitting in that chair, in that rehearsal room in Hackney, listening to the last vibration of a guitar string she could no longer hear, she could not have told you what she was feeling. Only that it was large. Only that it was real. She looked at Kurt. He was looking at the floor again. Back to the fixed point. Back to the nothing that was on it. She did not speak to him again that night. Not because there was hostility or awkwardness in the social sense. There was neither. It was more that she understood, with a clarity she couldn't explain, that anything she said would land beside the point. Not because he was unreachable, because the point was already made, because whatever had happened in that room was complete, and adding language to it would be like adding something to a sentence that was already finished. She drove back in a cab she barely registered taking. She sat in the back and looked at the lights of London and thought about a boy in Iceland when she was very young, 8, 9 years old, who used to sit in the schoolyard and watch the other children play without any apparent longing to join them. She had forgotten him entirely until that cab ride. She had no idea why she thought of him then. The weeks after Hackney were ordinary weeks. recording sessions, interviews, the slow bureaucratic labor of being a person whose music is being released into the world. Life resumed its shape, but something would surface in certain moments, not as memory, more as sensation. When she was at a piano alone in the early hours, close to something true in a melody and feeling it approach like weather. In those moments, what came back was not the memory of a song, but the memory of a quality. She told no one, not out of calculation, because she didn't yet have the words, and she was not willing to diminish it by using the wrong ones. She found the words, or some approximation of them, 16 years later. It was 2008. She was in the middle of an interview for a British music publication, and the journalist, young, earnest, trying to ask interesting questions, asked her if there was any artist she had met whose work had affected her in a way she hadn't anticipated. The question was meant to elicit a name, a quotable name, the kind of answer that photographs well. She was quiet for long enough that the journalist looked up from his notebook, and then she said this. There was one evening, years ago, a musician. We didn't talk much. He played something on an acoustic guitar. Just a few minutes, nothing finished. And I realized I had been wrong about something. I had believed that I understood music from the inside. Not just technically, but emotionally, the mechanism of it, the why of it. That night I understood that I had only been understanding my own version of the inside. There was a different inside, and I hadn't known it existed. The journalist asked whose it was. She said Kurt Cobain. Then she said, he wasn't performing being troubled. He wasn't managing anything. He was just present with whatever was true for him. I had never seen that before. I have not seen it since. The journalist wrote it down. She looked out the window for a moment before continuing. She said, I cried afterward. Not that night. Months later when I heard that he was gone. I cried in a way that surprised me because I had met him once, for a few hours, and we had barely spoken. But I think I was crying for the music that was still in him that I had heard a corner of. For what else was in that quiet place on the floor that I had seen him looking at and couldn't follow him into? She paused. The journalist didn't say anything. She said, I think that is the loneliest kind of music, the kind that lives so completely inside one person that it cannot be fully translated. It can only be felt, at a distance, like light from something very far away. She paused. The journalist didn't say anything. The section about Kurt was not the headline. The journalist had buried it near the end, preceded by a longer discussion about her recording process, her collaboration with producers in New York, her thoughts on the relationship between technology and the human voice. But readers found the paragraph. They returned to her words repeatedly, not because they were revelatory in the biographical sense, because they were not. They told you nothing about Kurt Cobain that the music hadn't already told you. They were not new information. They were instead confirmation that what people had felt when they listened, that feeling of contact with something genuinely unmediated, was real. That it was not projection, that someone else had stood in the same radius of that quality and been stopped by it. In the years after, Björk was asked about it several times. In each instance, she answered briefly and moved on. She had said what she had to say. The elaborations would only soften it. There is a recording, incomplete, unofficial, of a solo performance Kurt gave sometime in the early 90s. The quality is poor. The guitar is slightly out of tune. His voice is too close to the microphone so that you can hear the breath before each phrase. The small sounds of a person being honest in the only way they know how. It is not one of the famous songs. When Björk heard it, she has never said when exactly. She recognized something, not the melody, the quality underneath the melody. That same quality from the corridor in Hackney. She told a journalist in 2008 that she cried months after he was gone. What she did not say was that what moved through her was not grief in the ordinary sense. It was something more structural. The recognition that a particular kind of honesty had existed, briefly, in the form of a person, and was now somewhere that could not be reached. Not lost, somewhere, just somewhere that could not be reached.